Thank you, Madam Speaker. The sins of the few should not be punished by many. Could you imagine if one makes a mistake and then all are punished in anything? In any society, in any life? Now, my brother's in law enforcement. He can't wait to retire. His retirement date cannot come fast enough. And there are so many just like him in this state. And the reason are the things we're doing right here in this chamber. I don't think you realize, based on what you have here and what your intentions are here, what the implications and consequences will be. You know not what you do, in my opinion. I have had people in my district and law enforcement say that they will leave this state. If this bill passes, this careless piece of legislation that puts law enforcement officers in danger when they cannot use an important tool to protect themselves, when they are trying to protect all of you. So when you call 911 and want help, you may not get it. Because there may not be law enforcement out there to come help you. Because they've left. The backdoor loss is coming. Keep doing this type of legislation and you only expedite that. And good law enforcement officers will leave this state. They already are. Now, what you don't know about my district is it is bordered by Wyoming and Nebraska, and even parts of Kansas. And these young professionals who are trying to do right can very easily move to another state and apply there and acquire employment in a much more law enforcement friendly environment. Whether the perception is real or perceived, Colorado is getting a reputation due to legislation like this and those who sponsor it, that the men and women in blue do not get support. This bill, like so many before it, are clear evidence in that. You see, when you do have a perpetrator who perhaps is a criminal, one of the safest things a law enforcement officer can do is say, you need to get on the ground. Put your hands behind your back. Now, most citizens will comply. There are some that are so arrogant and so disrespectful of authority that they will not. We've seen many incidents and evidence of that. Now, the times that I was arrested, and it's no secret, when law enforcement has you, they got you. It's a lot easier just to cooperate with them. Now, there is a thrill in the chase. But you know when you've been had, you just need to cooperate. It goes a lot easier, I've found. For everybody, including the law enforcement officer that has to deal with you and what you've done, or what you may have done, or what's perceived to be done. regardless of your trust or distrust. But when you take tools away from law enforcement that says you can't do certain things that put you at risk as a law enforcement officer, like my brother, then the family members of those law enforcement officers do not want their husbands, sons, daughters, wives, grandsons, granddaughters, uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews. They don't want their lives to be at risk, and they don't want them to be a casualty. Much like my two colleagues who have spoke before me. I'm not qualified to speak. I've never served in law enforcement, but my brother has and still does, and he's also on color guard. And his retirement date can't get here fast enough. Is that what you all want with these unintended consequences, with this bad legislation that puts officers, both male and female, at great risk? Now, if we're running this bill because of George Floyd or something like that, I go back to where I started. The sins of the few should not be punished by the many. And this is what you do to all those good, and I'm talking thousands of law enforcement officers, male and female, who go out and try to do good every day in a very difficult environment and landscape. You put them at risk. Perhaps you put my own brother at risk. And he's been in very difficult situations with some of the worst criminals, gang members, kidnap, murder, rape, so many heinous and just horrible things, because they have to deal with the worst of the worst. They don't want to, but it is their duty. I don't think it's fair. I wouldn't want to be in law enforcement in this state. And if I had children that wanted to pursue that career, I think I'd talk them out of it, especially after this type of legislation. So I'll be a no. And I will encourage all of you to remember, the sins of the few should not punish the many. Thank you.
Representative Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to serve with you.
And an honor to serve with you.
Members, you know I'm here to vote no. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the people that I represent. I've got some of the finest men I know as sheriffs in the counties that I represent. They are outstanding people, and they do a tremendous amount of work in training their crew and their sheriffs, deputies, and they spare no expense about making sure that these individuals in those counties are doing the things that they should be doing them, the way they should be doing them, at the time they should be doing them. And I'm well acquainted with the chief of police in my hometown, not for the reasons that my colleague was talking about. Sorry, it just couldn't pass that one up. But when this bill started circulating around, they gave me phone calls right away and were literally worried about what in the world is going on. This is a tool that we use, and we don't abuse, and we don't overuse. We use this as a way of taking control of the situation. We've heard from my colleagues that have been in law enforcement how it's used, why it's used, and when it's used. Now, we've all seen news articles and all the other things that probably bring about these type of bills. But the point is, that's not what's going on in my district. And I want to pass that on to you, that there are people out there that are truly professional, and they're training professionals. And they insist, from the people that they hire, on the highest caliber of individuals in dealing with the people that are in their counties. And I would bet that every one of you would be proud to meet them and to get to know them, because that's the kind of people they are. When I get in a situation where I wonder about law enforcement, I call those fellas and ask them what they think. And they're real straight with me and telling me that it is getting harder and harder to live up to the rules that we're laying out in front of them and to the men and women that work with them and work for them. Disillusionment is out there. People that wear a badge have a target on them already. There are people that just flat don't trust them, don't want anything to do with them. But it's interesting. When we need them, we want that badge. We need that badge. And we want it as quickly as possible to get to where we are. And I don't think any of us would be upset if they used the prone restraint to get somebody down that was hurting your family or my family or the family next door. I don't think we would judge that, because the incident would be over and we could go back to being safe again. And that's all we're talking about. We need to help these individuals stay safe. We don't need to load up a handbook that they've got to go through before they ever arrest somebody. Say, well, could I do this? Could I do that? Or, well, maybe not. I shouldn't. I better wait. Wait gets people hurt and maybe killed. We've had people tell us about that. Members, we should be helping these law enforcement people because they're the ones that are helping you and I. One of the reasons that we can walk out of this building safe is because of people that wear a badge. You know, I don't know if we give them enough credit. I know that there's a lot of times I walk right on by and never think about the fact that they're here watching over me and you. You know, if something hits my mind, I once in a while say thanks for being here. But I do know that it makes me feel better when I walk into some of the grocery stores in this town and there are two individuals wearing a badge standing at the door. I feel a lot better knowing they're there. Those guys I thank pretty regular. And if some incident were to start while I'm there, I don't think I'm going to be looking at whether or not their technique was right, because someone else defined the technique. I just know the incident's over, and I feel better. So I think we ought to all think about, how do we feel when we realize that we are now safe because of a well-trained individual made an incident stop? That's what they're there for. That's why they've devoted their lives to this kind of a profession. You know, I couldn't do it. I'm sure of that. I either have too hot a temper or I'm about half chicken. But these individuals walk towards it. They don't run from it. And that's something that I find admirable. I would like to see us take the same amount of effort to congratulate the people that are protecting our communities and our families as we take in changing how they go about protecting us. You know, I've been here when some of the big changes have happened. And I've gone home and had them look at me and say, why? And I can't answer that. There are a couple of votes in this building that I wish I had back. And that's one of them. But I've made a commitment to do everything that I can since that vote to help. Even though I got convinced I was helping that day, I wasn't. But today I am. Today I'm helping them by saying I vote no. And when I go home, I'll tell them, yes, I did vote no, and I meant it. And I stood and I talked for you. I spoke about your bravery. I spoke about your education, your training, and the type of people that you are. And I want you to know that I am very proud of you. And that I am proud to call you friends. Thank you. Please vote no.
Members, as we continue to move forward, I do ask all of us to speak to the content of the bill. I know there has been reflection on the introduced version and the amended version. We are voting on the amended version and ask you all to remain focused on the content of the legislation before you. Representative Epps.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The lights outside show that the poet Gucci Mane is performing outside, and he has a lyric that is so very perfect for this bill, but even I couldn't figure out how to clean it up. I'm going to absolutely follow your admonition about speaking to the bill. I have told you all, told this body several times how badly I wish I could be voting on the bill that the opposition described. Y'all, what we are being told would put officers at risk is writing down a policy. Am I correct in understanding that the bill as amended and as prospectively moving through this body is one that requires law enforcement in Colorado not to stop putting people's hands behind their back, not to follow a state model policy about prone restraint, not to stop the practice at all, but to write down their policy for it. Is that a fair description? And report when it's used. The proscription in the bill is that law enforcement has to write down their policy and report when a violation of it is used. There is no way, and I used to be a defense attorney, and we can make some logical leaps, but there is no way to get from there to endangering a police officer. Our colleague from Penrose, some of you have seen the flow chart of how she makes legislative decisions about bills. I have one as well. And one component of my philosophy around these bills is I believe we have too many occasions in the law that set up unwarranted interaction between community members and police. So things that put distance between those groups are things I prefer more often than not. When a bill, even as amended, reflects a premise that there's an understanding that there's perhaps even just one being too many, that there's some amount, potentially, of this use of force that is more than what we would otherwise desire. If only you could have heard what Gucci just said. Y'all, I'm pausing because I want to be very careful that I'm not impugning the motives. Is it impugning if it's positive? I don't think so. I know the motives are positive, are to protect Coloradans, whether they're have decided to become law enforcement or not, or to keep our communities safer, and to set clear rules by which police officers or law enforcement can act, but also standards that community can expect to be followed. Because the clearer the expectations, the safer we all can be. And I might actually be talking myself into a yes. But because if at a minimum, the directive was followed to write down the policies, that would be progress. What I want you to understand is that to believe that law enforcement is endangered by this bill, or that even to believe that law enforcement could be in danger by the extension of the bill, which would be banning the practice, you would have to think that in a moment, a life or death moment, or a moment of potential serious bodily injury, that an officer is going to be aware that a certain perhaps physical tactic is against the rules and is going to choose in that moment to comply with the rules so to the letter that they're not going to go home to their family that night. I don't believe that would happen, and it shouldn't happen. We would throw parades, not protests, for the law enforcement officer who barely deviates from some practice and makes an appropriate call to save their life or that of others. We're talking about a bill that directs them to write down their policy and record if there's a violation of it. Some of us, it's me, think that it's a red flag on a policing bill when almost all the policing groups are brought to neutral. Some of us see that as a reason to do a little more investigation. But when they're almost all but the one, I presume, there's one who's never with us, but if all but one go to neutral, that means even they are conceding non-opposition to the requirement to write down the policy. Today we have heard repeatedly two things. We've heard lots of things, but we've heard two things that, if true, cannot coexist when it comes to Colorado law enforcement. It cannot both be true. It cannot both be true, sir, that in one moment we're saying law enforcement in my county should not, cannot, and must not follow your law, but then in the next breath, we are so law-abiding that we would sacrifice our life before we would violate a rule. Both of those things can't coexist. I think you are selling Colorado law enforcement woefully short, and being, not you, any specific person, but I think it is an insult to Colorado law enforcement to suggest that they cannot write down the policy that we are all so confident that they follow. I am appreciative of the law enforcement in my city and county, who I wish would often be as forthcoming in public as they are in private about their comfort with the policy, because they sure enough come and ask us to tell on our fathers and our families and our neighbors. But you've got to have a really low view of law enforcement if you think they, who can outline a specific tactic, cannot also write down what it is, when it's appropriate to use it, when it's not, and record those violations, which should be zero. So should be no record keeping needed. That's what the heart of this bill as amended is. I wish we were advancing it as introduced, because I don't know when we're going to get a chance to advance that policy is when we lose someone else. I think a lot more of our officers. Madam Speaker, I have a little bit less than a minute.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you for that. Every time you cross 14th and Sherman, if you ever cross 14th and Sherman, you're crossing a spot where a federal jury awarded me a sum of money that is too high, but I understood their reasons. Because a cop who was following policy and procedure, who was acting consistent with his training, according to the city, who was acting in accordance with the same sort of policy that this bill would invite officers to record, dropped to his knee as if he were in a video game, targeted me, and shot at me in the calf with a pepper ball. And what was heard, as I wrap, I just want you to know that what was heard on the body cam footage, insert lecture against body cams, but was one officer saying to the other officer after he shot at me and shot me in my calf, he said, "Sarge told you not to shoot her. Sarge told you
Representative
not to
Epps,
shoot
you have
her."
1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the point of that is, the policy is just a step. The policy told him not to shoot at me. Sarge, whoever that was, told him not to shoot at me. His colleagues saw it and he did it anyway. Somehow between here and my seat, I'm going to try and figure out how to push a different button. But the point is, that should be recorded. This is the barest of minimums. I can't vote yes, but I hope that you will.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to come down and talk about one thing that we brought up in committee that I wish had been changed with this particular bill, and it's about the placement in statute. With it being in Title 18, which is our criminal code, and not Title 24, which has much more of the administrative duties of local government, it actually means that we have a real practical issue, because you are going to have the administrator, the person who's actually looking at the policies and obligations that they need to go ahead and write and post and place onto the website. They're going to be looking in Title 24, and they're going to be checking a box as they go down, making sure they're complying with what we're asking of those entities. Title 18 is our criminal code, so that's where we're listing the crimes that we've enumerated within the state. And that's not quite the same area of law that a particular administrator is going to be going through to look for what they need to be posting to websites or what they need to have as a written policy. And therefore, it's entirely inappropriate that it's in Title 18 and not Title 24. And I still have been a little bit perplexed as to why the sponsors have been unwilling to move it to Title 24 and want to keep it in Title 18, especially because this is not encapsulating a specific crime. There's actually duties that are there being fulfilled that are administrative duties. So for those reasons, I'll be a no vote. However, certainly if we could work out a change, I'd be glad to reconsider.
Representative DeGraff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad it was stepped down, and my colleague said it's better than it was. But I feel like the Section 24 versus the Section 18 is just indicative of it being a step. Because what happens too often is the legislation that happens is just a step. And then the more radical can be added more easily because it's just a little bit more. So I don't know. I mean, when we have a strike below, it's an entirely different bill. It seems like it should go back. It should start over. We should start talking to the police again. No, I'm not always on the side of just our job is not to make necessarily enforcing laws as most thorough as we can. Our job is to secure the rights of the individual, whether we think they're guilty of something or not. So I think it's important to have these guardrails, but I'm very concerned when we put it in Section 24 versus Section 18 and the implications. And is that just a step so that more radical legislation can be brought in next year? Maybe not. Maybe not, but what it makes me think of is when we have, because every death, every single injury that happens, no matter what the person is doing, that might have elicited the response. Everyone is a tragedy, not something that we need. But what this bill makes me think of is the quote, "Critics are men who watch the battle from a high place, then they come down to shoot the survivors." And this whole exercise started off with full contact critique, criticism. And I don't think it respects the split-second decisions that have to be made by these individuals. And if you've ever made a split-second decision, you know that those split-second decisions can be stretched out over months in terms of the analysis. I've made them. I know all the police here have made them. I don't know that the people looking down from the ivory towers and criticizing have made them. Maybe they have. But another quote is, "Farming is easy when you're 1,000 miles away and your plow is a pen." It's easy to criticize. It's easy to take apart the events that you see unfold. It's easy to watch all that happen in slow motion, from the comfort of your chair, from the comfort of a courtroom, and then analyze to death a decision that had to be made. I think this is best policy. I mean, it doesn't seem to be that we have evidence that this is a rampant problem. Obviously, a single death, single injury, that is a problem. We don't want that to happen again, but there has to be some level of grace for allowing to make it possible for people to enter into these very dangerous, very dynamic situations. And I agree, they're probably not going to be analyzing the policy, but there's always that in the back of their mind. And it's amazing how that happens. And when you say in the split second, a split second can take ages with temporal distortion. That's how adrenaline works. Remember when an aircraft pitched over and went to -6 Gs? I had time to think, am I going to get in trouble? Do I need to eject? There was a lot that went through my head, and then realizing later that could have only happened in a fraction of a second. I don't know how that happened. So yes, you will have, the more we micromanage, the more we jump into that space, the more we look down from the ivory tower and muddle in business that we don't understand, the more second guessing that's going to happen. And that can cause a lot of problems. And if we have law enforcement that is thinking about leaving, and I know we have some probably in here that have the pedantic idea that if we just got rid of law enforcement, we would have no crime.
Representative DeGraff, to the content of the amended bill, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But civilization is a very thin veneer over absolute chaos. And we need to honor that, and we need to be very, very careful about inserting ourselves into places, especially from the high places, and then coming down and shooting the survivors. I recommend a no vote. I ask for a no vote. take this back if it's still somehow necessary. Don't consider non-opposition to be some form of support. Don't consider that that agencies that have been beaten into submission are all of a sudden okay with it. Let's have the real conversation. Let's be the deliberative body. Let's have this out. Our job is to support Colorado. These officers they do support the rights of others. We need to be very careful. So I recommend a no vote.
Assistant Majority Leader Bacon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. I will admit that after standing in recognition of the life lost, I wanted to come down to the well to support my colleague from the near northeast of Denver. We are sometimes mistaken for each other. And quite frankly, I will honestly say, being a black woman and talking about policing has been a difficult conversation to be a part of. I know we have other black women in this room, and I know they understand what I'm talking about, so I came down here just to be in the well to support her, because we have been blamed for the death of law enforcement. Even if I wasn't in the legislature, I've been blamed for the death of law enforcement. And I hoped that we weren't going to end up talking about policing. But I will move us back to the bill, particularly as we navigate through this issue. I first want to tell you a hope that I have too in listening to the opposition, in that I hope I didn't hear that no one wants to be a police officer because no one wants to respect, or maybe put it like this, we're losing applicants. No one wants to be a police officer because they can't put people in prone restraints. I'm not sure if that's what someone said. I don't want to impugn motives, but I want to understand the argument. I hope I didn't hear that no one wants to be a police officer because they're come down too hard on because people want to be able to sleep in their bed without having the door kicked in. And the reason why I bring those up is because those are the policies that we've brought in this chamber. We talked about no-knock warrants. We talked about we'll talk about prone restraints. And so I hope that's not what I'm hearing. Because what comes with these policies are cries of, I can't breathe. What comes with these policies are cries for mama, mama. Elijah McClain's mother was present when we talked about this policy. Tyree, Brianna, Sandra. So I hope we are not equating those things, because there is no winning in any conversation about a life for a life. There is no winning about a black life versus a blue life. There is no winning. I want to be clear as to why I became a legislator, particularly in that time period. I came here to be able to change policy so someone didn't have to die as a catalyst to change it. We are bringing this policy in a season to which we don't have to respond to I can't breathe. We are bringing this policy in a season where we should have learned something about what it takes to create safe communities. And to be clear, I am terrified. We talk to our children differently. We say, behave when you get in the car. We say, don't fight back, but you might feel like doing that because you're scared to death when someone pulls you over.
AML Bacon, I will direct you back to the policy before.
The prone restraint policy is about a type of hold. It is not putting your hands behind your back. It is being incapacitated, which is the point for safety. But if left too long, if left on something hot, if left in a puddle, that is when your life is at risk. This is not the same type of hold as handcuffing. Therefore, it needs to be treated differently because what is at risk? And we have the proof. This is not something we're making up. We know people have died because of this type of restraint. And all we are asking is that the use of it be considered differently because the risks are different than simply having your hands behind your back. We talk about our mental health differently in our community. The summer of the death of George Floyd, I went to the cardiologist. My blood pressure was 214 over 193. And my doctor asked me, why aren't you functionally having a stroke? Are you under stress? And it was the occasion. I had kids out there, and I don't know what they're going to be met with. And if they're going to be met with a detention strategy like this, I do care that people write down and care a little bit differently when it happens. I want to end in this. We are all affected at the loss of life, whether it's in law enforcement or in our community. But the answer to that is to build trust. I need to trust that I won't die. You need to trust that I know you care about me enough so that I don't worry about that. That is how we solve the problem. This bill makes me feel safer because it makes me trust the process. We banned this type of restraint in schools. Did we know that? Because of the threat to children. The answer is that we all contribute to culture change. We need to know that I can tell my son or my 6 brothers to get in a car and what to expect if they are detained. And if we don't want the consternation and the pushback, our community has to trust, know, believe, and receive what the policies are, because we all deserve it. We all deserve to trust each other and to be told that me pushing a policy in the absence of a death means I should be blamed. Well, I get it the least. My colleagues get threats every day. But I will always try to change through our civility. I will always honor anybody who's passed away in doing their duty. But the issues we have is because of what people saw law enforcement doing. People did not see Breonna sleeping. And so what are we committed to be able to build that trust where it needs to start somewhere? And I will say to anybody who wants to work in this state as law enforcement, we are going to believe you when you say you want to keep us safe. This is what we need to feel safe. And I know people are willing. But if we need to change the culture, so be it. I don't call 911. I want to. I don't ask someone armed to walk me to my car. I want to. But I will get there if I know what I can rely on. Because I cannot no longer go to another vigil and say I didn't do anything about it. So I will put myself out there.
1 minute remaining.
More than willing. What is all of our commitment? What is all of our commitment? You have heard mine. And if we're going to talk about where the consternation comes from, let me be a delegate. You have heard mine. Thank you. Please support this bill.
Representative Clifford.
Members, the first few moments that I heard any testimony on this bill, I was trying to reconcile where we were with the bill. And I am sorry for your loss. I was at that funeral as well. But nobody in that situation was ever put in a prone restraint. That was not what we were talking about here. This bill is about what's in a policy. Now, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I do think that the original version of this bill was really bad. And before I ever saw it on paper, I met with the sponsor, and he looked at me and said, uh-oh, this is really bad. We're going to have to work on this and sort this out. And I watched him graciously interact with law enforcement until he understood what needed to go in the legislation. It is a completely different piece of policy. It's a completely different bill. Fully different. I laid down on the floor and said, sometimes this is the safest way for us to restrain people. So, police officers, we're not asking you to do anything different than you've been trained to do. We're not asking you to change one thing from your current post-training. Mostly what this bill did was took what we already train our police officers to do and codified it. That's what we were left with in this. I don't have a problem that we codify what's already in training. Colorado State Patrol does not have a problem the county sheriffs do not have a problem that we've codified what we already have in training. This is what we're already doing. We had a lot of things that changed after George Floyd. Police learned from that as well. Do I have a problem with us taking what we've learned and what we've educated ourselves as police officers and putting it in code? No, not at all. Do I have a problem reporting when we use this very rare use of force? This is something you almost never use. I asked, I won't mention who, but a trooper that has retired from the state patrol back there. How many times in your entire career did you ever have to prone someone? It wasn't a huge number. But when it's used, it is often the safest for the situation. It's also very important that you recover somebody quickly, and we train that, and everybody trains for that. And police officers don't have to do anything different based on what's in this bill today. Now, I also take a little bit of issue, the mischaracterization that we've had where we went back to that horrible version and said, this is what you're doing to run police officers out of this state, as if this dialogue that we just went through in this whole process where we mischaracterize what's actually in the legislation. You're telling police officers, I disagree. You went back to something that was horrible that got made good through stakeholding, through law enforcement coming to the table, and then you started telling us that that's what was going to make the police officers leave. Well, I don't think so. I think police officers appreciate what's in this bill. I think they understand what we're asking them to do, and I am a yes on this legislation.
Representative Herod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for listening to this conversation. I want to make clear that I don't hate law enforcement. I've mentioned multiple times that my father, who chose to raise me, is the best man I know. 30 years he served as law enforcement in the state of Colorado, in one of the most dangerous prisons in the country, at Supermax Prison. He worked his way up from a groundskeeper to the head of internal investigations. I am proud of what he did to take care of me and my family. And it's harmful to me and it's hurtful to me to have for so long been mischaracterized as someone who does this work because I hate my father. Every single bill that I've brought before the General Assembly dealing with law enforcement has been stake-held with law enforcement. Every single idea has come from at least one person in law enforcement who said, I want to help you make this better. But as a kid, I remember being so proud of my dad when he came home in his uniform. But I also remember when Trayvon was shot for having Skittles. As a kid with asthma, I was told by my own parents, if I'm interacting with law enforcement, do not reach for my inhaler because I may be shot. My own father, who is a man of color, said that he knows there is danger even with him, who is trained in law enforcement, gets stopped by law enforcement. And as a kid, there was one day I remember in particular when my father got home from work. He was not in his uniform anymore. He was in jeans. And I said, Dad, what's up? Nothing. Day 1, day 2, day 3. We talk about that now. My dad tells me, I stopped wearing my uniform home because I didn't want people to know in our neighborhood that I was law enforcement, because I didn't want to be targeted. I didn't want the family to be targeted. He didn't want to tell my nieces and nephews what he did to put food on the table because law enforcement has had such a bad rap. He worked his entire career to make sure there was more integrity in law enforcement. And in my position now, he asked me to do the same, so that little girls and boys and children could one day want to be law enforcement again, that we no longer had any more Trayvons or Elijahs or Briannas, and that there was more trust in the community again. This bill on prone restraint does not ban prone restraint. In fact, no version of the bill did. But it does say when the scene is secure, you have to put someone in a recovery position. That is what my dad was trained to do, and he did. So that they don't die. Elijah McClain's mother came to us and testified in committee. She reminded us of the videos that we saw when Elijah was not put in a recovery position. He died on his own vomit and blood, calling for his mother. Another woman we met was put in prone, a slight woman who was not a threat to anyone, and then kept in prone. This is not a hand on your elbow gently guiding you. Prone is face down, hands behind your back. Prone restraint and mechanical prone restraint is akin to being hogtied. Please do not say that it's just guiding someone gently. It is not. It is a use of force. This woman was then put not in recovery position, but then in the back of a squad car for the entire ride to jail, and she flew forward underneath the seat of the law enforcement officer, and she was not put in a recovery position. She was never turned around. She was not given that respect. But God graced her with her life. She is still alive. Elijah is not. There are so many good law enforcement officers out there who know what to do. Many drafted the amendment with us. They supported the amendment. The sheriffs, the FOP, the DAs, CSP, who I respect CSP officer saved my life one day in this very building when someone came in and tried to shoot the governor. I was standing right there. Nothing but respect for these officers. In fact, they came to my house to protect me when another officer threatened my life. Nothing but respect. They tell me the thing that they hate the most as good cops are bad cops. The thing that makes them the most unsafe on the street are cops that act outside of the duty of their badge. This bill simply says prone restraint should and can be used when appropriate. But when not appropriate, when used excessively or wrong, when you leave someone hogtied in the back of your car and they go underneath your seat and you still don't stop to get them into a recovery position, that is wrong. It's not only against policy, but when this bill passes, it will be against the law in the state of Colorado. That is what this bill does. And that is right. Members, I will not be afraid to continue to do the work to increase integrity within law enforcement, not only because my dad asked me to, but I will not stop because I'm afraid, because someone puts my life in danger every time they say I hate cops. I do not. These bills are not because we hate law enforcement. If I wanted to write a bill that said we should no longer have law enforcement in the state of Colorado, who thinks I wouldn't write it? Who here thinks I would not bring that bill? I would. But that is not what I believe. But I do believe that we should hold people accountable to the standards that they set. This bill says you have prone restraint policy law in your rules in your policies. You have recovery positions in your policies. Follow them. Maybe we should have titled this bill, When to Use Law Enforcement Use of Recovery Positions. Do you know what that means? Allowing someone to breathe. Literally in the bill, it says it. Putting someone in a position where they can breathe, we have to write that out. That's what this bill does. Members, don't be afraid of doing the right thing because someone will completely mischaracterize you as hating the person the topic of the bill that you're working on, or mischaracterize you as saying you don't want to have law enforcement here ever again in the state of Colorado. That's not true. What we are trying to do is make sure that people live, but we're also not putting people's life in danger in the meantime. This is a straightforward bill, members. Vote yes.
The question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1372 on third reading, final passage. Mr. Schiebel, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Ortiz, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Ortiz votes yes. Representative Lindsay, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Lindsay votes yes. Representative Judah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Judah votes yes. Please close the machine. With 41 aye, 21 no, and 3 excused, House Bill 1372 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Representatives Ortiz, Judah, and Lindsay, co-sponsor. Please close the machine. Mr. Schiebel, please read the title to House Bill 1353.
House Bill 1353 by Representatives Sirota and Basenecker, also Senators Bridges and Michelson Janae, concerning requirements to engage in the business of dealing in firearms and in connection therewith, establishing a state firearms dealer permit and making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move House Bill 1353 on third reading and final passage.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise in opposition of this bill, House Bill 1353, which requires a state license equivalent of the federal firearms license to be able to sell firearms. It's important to understand why this is not needed. Let's go through where do crimes that are involved, or guns that are, I should say, involved in crimes come from? 40.7% of firearms traced, used, and trafficked for crimes were gained by criminals through what is called an unlicensed dealer, not FFLs, not the legal industry, not the licensed dealers. We have laws against that in Colorado because we actually have a universal background check law here in Colorado. 39.5% of crime guns are gained from illegal straw purchasing rings, a process where criminals are going into legal FFLs and lying and committing a felony by purchasing a gun for the criminal, essentially, who's probably sitting in the parking lot. The licensed dealer isn't the person who commits the crime here. The liar is the criminal. The purchaser is the criminal. The dealer, in this case, is the victim. 24% of guns used to commit a crime are coming from gun theft. These are guns stolen from cars, homes, and yes, maybe even businesses. But once again, this is not the dealer. 1.6% is the number of guns purchased directly over the counter from an FFL that are eventually used in a crime. Gun shops are the least likely to be the direct source of crime guns. This is even cited by a Biden administration report as well. Criminals don't use licensed dealers. Why? Because licensed dealers will not knowingly sell to a prohibited person. Because licensed dealers do not like criminals. Because licensed dealers are partners with the ATF, I'll call Tobacco and Firearms, in the law enforcement circles. Law enforcement are the friends and customers of these dealers as well. Those who commit crimes with guns don't go to licensed dealers. You may ask why? Well, as I just said, it's that list. They know that they're not going to pass the background check. They know that that universal background check will kick in and that they will not be able to buy a firearm. 78% of individuals committing a crime with a firearm have previously committed some other prohibiting crime, which makes them ineligible to legally purchase a firearm. If you know you've committed a felony which prevents you from legally purchasing a firearm, guess what? You're not going to go to a licensed gun dealer to purchase a firearm because you know you legally cannot be in possession of a gun. That's why they don't use dealers to purchase guns. Dealers in this case is the FFL. 50% of people committing crimes with a gun are under the age of 24 years old. I want to say that once again. 50% of people committing crimes with a gun are under the age of 24 years old, and half of that number is under the age of 21. They are too young to legally buy and own a gun in Colorado. That's why they do not go to FFLs. Among all criminals, juveniles are much more likely to possess firearms than an adult when committing a crime. It's also likely to be a handgun. Once again, they know that they're legally unable to purchase a firearm in Colorado. They would be prevented from doing so if they actually went to an FFL and that's why they do not go to an FFL. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has a $1.4 billion budget for enforcement. This translates to about $28 million per state for enforcement. Colorado receives our share, an appropriate amount. The ATF visited 262 FFLs in the last 12 months here within Colorado. They did revoke 9 licenses, which shows that regulation was doing as regulation does, as they're going through paperwork, double checking, triple checking, and there were some that they took enforcement action against. That means the ATF is doing their job. So statements that have been said throughout the course of the debate that the ATF is underfunded at $28 million for the Colorado region, probably not underfunded, that the ATF is not doing their job, 262 site visits resulting in 9 revocations, sounds like they're doing their job to me, all tells me that the ATF is actually regulating and doing their job. The fact that the numbers point to why those who are committing crimes are not going to licensed gun dealers is an illustration of why we do not need a duplicative federal license, state license for what the federal government already does. It's a secondary layer that is not needed. We should save our state resources, our precious state resources, to be able to better take a crack at crime in other places instead of standing up another form of regulation. We should be spending our money on how to address the problem, not duplicating what the federal government is already doing. And that's why I would urge a no vote here. Thank you.
Representative Lynch.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Delta for bringing some great facts and figures about why this won't do anything. And so I'm going to kind of repeat some of that. This is duplicative. We've got a federal regulation that takes care of this. And I want to go a little different angle here, where this really isn't going to affect those up and running, super successful gun shops. What it's going to affect are those folks in my part of the world that are small boutique operations that are making parts or doing different things where they have kind of a specialized FFL. And it's going to do the most harm to those guys. But the thing that grabs me the most about this bill is the fiscal note and the $3 million that we're going to spend and boy, I tell you, it's hard to sometimes, especially this time of year after the budget's passed, to get $3 million of anything through the Appropriations Committee, but this made it through there, and this seems pretty darn expensive. I'm not really sure what our bang for our buck is going to be on that, but as I said on second reading, this is, the good part of this is this is a job creator. This creates 25 jobs for our state at the cost of, I don't know how many jobs we're going to lose in this industry. And so I'm sure we'll get some more details about why this is bad, but I would just like to say this is a bad bill. Vote no.
Representative DeGraff.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, this is just a very sensitive space when you're dealing with the Second Amendment, when you're dealing with the underlying rights of our Constitution. We don't need to be turning law-abiding citizens into criminals. The statistics don't support it. If we want to spend $3 million on reducing crime, I would suspect that I hear lots of things, lots of ideas that get kicked around. It's like, I wish I could find some money for this. Some program to help kids after school, something that would maybe reduce crime, maybe not. But maybe But if you're going to try something and you're going to throw $3 million at it, the first one to do should probably not be risking a violation of constitutional rights, because it sets up a really bad precedent. And one thing that we know about any law like this is, you really have to read it, and then you have to kind of read into what it's going to turn into next session. What's going to be added next session? What number? What date? What quantity? What anything? Small changes. So that is one of the reasons that one of many reasons why we're very careful about what is going into our CRS, especially when it's in terms of what looks to be just more violation of the Second Amendment. And we have processes. And so if these processes aren't working, then at some point you need to evaluate, you need to stop, and you need to say, okay, well, if this entire number of things that have been done that are infringements of the Second Amendment have not worked, then maybe continual infringement of the Second Amendment is not the answer. Maybe you need to think about something else. And maybe it could be aligned with the Constitution. Not just the Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence on which the Constitution is founded. But we have law-abiding citizens. So law-abiding citizens, they see all of these laws as the majority party wanting to turn them into criminals. That's just how they see it. Now, we just had a conversation about the misuse of law enforcement, or the potential misuse of law enforcement. Well, one way to not have the misuse of law enforcement is to be very careful about the laws that are created, because the laws that are created will have to be enforced. And you have to be very careful about that. And sometimes it feels like these laws are just based on feels, and they just go in the books because it's envisioned that it's just gonna miraculously happen, and that somehow human nature is not gonna enter into this. In the creation of compliant sheep. I had one email about how awesome it was in Japan, because they have very restrictive rules in all these ways. Japan's a very different country, very isolated, very homogeneous, can't really be compared. But the other countries we've seen historically very large problems with this. And so I think we just need to be very careful. And I don't think this bill is very careful. It's redundant. It's creating more bureaucracy for the taxpayers, more records, more demands, all to accomplish nothing but feels. So I hope you'll vote no. I would be really surprised if you voted no. But I would hope that some of you, or some of us, would value the wisdom that was put in to our founding documents. that were put into our founding documents that has set us on a course of stability for over 2 centuries, when most any other constitution in the world can't even make it to 20 years. So we can't just look at the United States is an outlier. And it's an outlier because of the way the laws are set up, where the people are sovereign over the government. We're not set up to be an oligarchy where we have a few people in charge of a large number, whether they're considered to be in trust with all the means of production and per people. The people are considered sovereign, and in order to have a sovereign people, you have to also have self-defense, the right of self-defense, not only the right of self-defense, but the responsibility of self-defense, and that responsibility goes towards opposing a tyrannical government, because despite all of our safeguards in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, governments like this one tend towards tyranny. It's a historic fact. So we're in a very sensitive space with the Constitution, with the Declaration of Independence. That's why they said vigilance, that we had to maintain vigilance in order to keep our liberty. It was not something that would just stay with us because it was a good idea. Vigilance is hard. We lost it. That's why we are where we are. I ask for a no vote on this. Maybe reflect on why we have these constitutional principles instead of just thinking that they're inconvenient, and maybe maybe the wishful thinking will make it all go away.
Representative Armagost.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So in the other bill, we were talking about going after law-abiding gun owners. This bill goes after law-abiding gun business. So the firearm businesses, the FFLs, those that are already paying for a federal permit, already getting inspected by the federal government, and already held to the same account under that said federal government. And we want to double down, not only on the expense they have to renew now multiple permits, multiple licenses, they have to subject themselves to multiple variations of inspections on a state and federal level. And also penalties should something on the federal government or the state government become vacated by a technical error or whatever. Something gets offset, askew. That would cause them to be penalized on multiple levels. It would basically, especially under this bill with the penalty that was in the bill, would put most businesses, firearms businesses, out, either out of business, out of the state, or all of the above. Most of you know I'm in Berthoud. I have a close friend that owns a firearm business in Berthoud. Small business owner, like myself. I teach firearms, he manufactures and sells firearms. This would put him out of business. He is in an economy where anyone really is owning a business is living paycheck to paycheck in the small business world right now in Colorado. So this is something that would, any of these little infractions that are ginormous would put him out of business. He came and testified here at the Capitol and realized he was a little behind on all the legislation that was coming through, and has already made plans to move, not only uproot his family and move out of state, but also his business. Millions of dollars of machines, somehow get those loaded and moved out of state so that he doesn't lose everything and go bankrupt and have to somehow pay all those loans off for all the machinery he's had to purchase to manufacture firearms. Those firearms are not used or sold to criminals, felons, anything. Everything is by the books. Everything is regularly inspected on who he's selling to, what he's selling to, and why. Any slip would obviously, on the federal level, usually lead to tens of thousands of dollars of fines and imprisonment. So nobody wants to do that in the firearms business because why? That's what criminals do, not business owners. This doesn't prevent firearms from getting into criminals' hands. This goes into the direction of preventing them from getting into law-abiding citizens that want to get firearms hands. This is something that is going to shut down business and force them out of state. Every city, every county, and every corner of this state. This is a lucrative business. This is somebody that is living their life with their passion. Whatever your passion may be. If somebody was targeting you for that and going after you with every regulation, every permit and license they can get for you to have to go after, every opportunity to get inspected, find something you might have missed, and hold you accountable, shut you down, I think you would be a little offended as well. This would probably make you not want to do this in Colorado. This would not make Colorado a lucrative place to be a business owner, especially in the firearms area. So, again, because it's different from what you believe, it's something worth being rid of. When we're talking about families, business owners, fellow Colorado citizens that are doing their jobs to make a living, and you want to push them out of state with bills like this. This is not what we want. I think we always talk about lifting up, elevating. We're talking about business owners. We're not talking about criminals. The criminals aren't in business with federal firearms licenses. If they are, they serve federal time. This is something that is shutting down business owners, forcing them out of state in places where they can make money. They can live a life without having to live in the stress and the daily not knowing whether you're going to be able to maintain your household, your business, put food on the table, any and or all of the above. It's sad. Just because somebody believes it's different, therefore it's dangerous. If you aren't in the business, it's not for you, but don't go after the ones that own those businesses, are doing the right things, because they are. If they weren't, they'd be held accountable. The federal law enforcement has that under control. So we need to let them do that and quit putting more and more hindrances on our business owners. Next, it can be a county permit or a municipal permit. This isn't okay. This isn't going to stop, and it's not okay. We need to leave them be, let them do what they're doing, because they are not the problem. The law-abiding business owners are not the problem. Criminal aspects of gun sales, gun thefts, everything else where guns are bought and sold on the black market in the streets of every community are the problem. We need to address that, not the people out there trying to feed their families and do the right thing. I encourage a no vote.
Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. It's late, bad bill. I won't belabor the point. There's lots of stuff I could talk about, but one thing jumped out at me. Page 4, line 17. A person who engages in the business of dealing in firearms without a state permit is guilty of an unclassified felony. We talk all the time in this building how we don't like felonies, how we don't want to make new felonies, except for law-abiding gun owners who currently, right now, today, are complying with the law. They're getting their federal permit. They're doing everything they're supposed to do. But if they don't get a duplicate permit as required under this bill, they're going to be a felony. No.
Representative Frizzell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This bill has so many issues with it, it's hard to tell where to start. I have no understanding of what coordination would exist between the ATF and the Department of Revenue for inspection and enforcement, because candidly, the Department of Revenue has a sketchy track record when it comes to MED inspections and enforcement also. But that aside, this bill does not prevent criminals from getting firearms. They really aren't being purchased from FFAs today anyway. I have in front of me this handy-dandy federal forms, ATF form 4473, that if you are to purchase a gun, you have to fill this bad boy out. And one of the questions on here is, are you the actual transferee / buyer of all firearms listed on this form and any continuation sheets, blah, blah, basically saying, is this a straw purchase? There's all sorts of other questions, you know, are you are you mentally ill? Have you ever been adjudicated as a mental defective, or have you ever been committed to a mental institution? All sorts of things that we are, with this bill, asking our FFA dealers to determine. That's already going on. We're not doing anything new and different. And in fact, this bill presumes that this type of interaction and identification isn't happening. I know we are short on time. I urge a no vote. This bill is not doing what you think it should.
Representative Bradley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill is aimed at firearm dealers who are abiding by the law, abiding by all the new legislation that come every year to regulate and mandate them more. The representative from Delta told you the ATF visited over 250 FFLs and only had 9 revocations. The supermajority of FFLs abide by the laws enforced on them. And the sponsor spoke about gun safety and that this is part of the solution to protect people, but I would argue there are now 30,000 gun purchases a month in the state of Colorado. There are about 1 million concealed carry permit holders, and more that are deciding they want to own one for safety. Criminals are not buying their guns from FFLs because you know they won't be able to pass a background check legally. But more restrictions on FFLs will keep more people who want to own guns for safety from doing so, because we are going to force them out of the state. They are going to close up their small businesses and they are going to leave. And then we won't have anyone or anywhere to purchase our firearms for. And for what? Because I've heard no statistical evidence. I've just heard about feelings. I've heard that this is for gun safety. And I've yet to hear what that means, because Colorado is not going to be the first state to begin a state-level permit requirement on top of the already required FFL. 15 other states have adopted this policy as well. And out of these states, this pending Colorado legislation is some of the most extreme, requiring not just a dealer permit, but also an additional employee background check and unrealistic training. And let's see what happened in the other states. Because if we're going to pass model legislation based on other states, let's see if it actually worked. And we have seen it fail time and time again. In Alabama, where they have similar legislation, they require all gun dealers to obtain a state license. Yet Alabama has a gun violence rate of 25.9 gun deaths per every 100,000 residents. The national average is 14.4. So how will this legislation make a difference in Colorado if it's not even doing it in Alabama? How will sabotaging the process for becoming a licensed firearm dealer or their employee benefit Colorado as a whole? And what issue does this legislation seek to solve? We have heard it time and time again from representative after representative. The bill does nothing to address access to illegal firearms, juvenile access to firearms, penalty for theft of firearms. So it does nothing for the criminals. However, it does place a huge emphasis on imposing additional requirements and harsh penalties on law-abiding firearm dealers. We have the statistics from the ATF that these small business owners are abiding by the law. Common sentiment is to repeat the statistic that the majority of firearms used in crimes were obtained legally. False. That does not include the fact that firearms, even when purchased legally, can change hands and end up being used in the commission of a crime. The ATF found that 54% of traced crime guns were recovered by law enforcement more than 3 years after their purchase. Those guns were legally purchased but were later used in crimes, the report indicated. More than 1 million guns were stolen from private citizens in 4 years only. This bill does nothing to address those issues. Rather, it will create a more difficult and burdensome environment for firearm dealers to stay in compliance with the law. It will be more difficult for a firearm dealer to hire employees. It will begin to be more difficult for a law-abiding citizen to obtain a firearm. And again, we have 30,000 purchases a month in this state. And I've told my constituents, get it done. Get it done before July 1st. Protect these small business owners. It will begin to be more difficult for law-abiding citizens to obtain a firearm, but this bill will do nothing to prevent a firearm from getting into the hands of criminals. We could get on this if this was actually going to give us gun safety. It's not. You're closing down good businesses, and you're not doing anything with the criminals. This bill will not prevent gun violence, as you cannot legislate criminal intent. Criminals who are intent on obtaining a firearm are not deterred. I know this is a news flash. Criminals are not deterred by permitting requirements. They will continue to acquire firearms illegally. And when all the firearm dealers have been put out of business from extreme penalties associated with this bill, the only people left unarmed will be law-abiding citizens. And if I just told you that 1 million concealed carry owners are in the state, for those who don't like to do math, that's 1 in 6. Those are people in your district that this bill will affect. 1 in 6 people this bill will affect. Are we thinking about those people when we continue to pass legislation like this? Are we thinking about our feelings? And I would love for you to tell the people of Colorado what the solution is, because I've sat here all day, working, fighting for my constituents. We decriminalize crime because we don't like felonies, except for law-abiding citizens. That's when felonies are okay. We restrict funding for police. In Denver, they just pulled $8 million to fund police. We regulate and restrict law enforcement. We drive FFLs out of the state with this bill. We restrict Second Amendment rights, but I have yet to get the solution. What's the solution? Because criminals are still going to get guns. The only thing happening is to decrease police in our state, increase crime, decrease the ability for individuals to protect ourselves. This is not fair to the people in our districts or the FLLs in our district. There is zero solution being offered, and the law-abiding business owners are going to pay the price. And then the people of Colorado who want to protect themselves will pay the price of the only thing this will solve is the amount of victims that we are going to have in Colorado. This legislation is doing nothing to criminals. It's doing everything to the future victims in our state. Because with more and more legislation being passed in this body on gun owners and firearm dealers, our crime continues to increase and increase and increase and increase. It would be nice to come down to this well and agree with legislation that would actually help protect the people of Colorado, but instead we keep legislating to protect the criminals. I urge a no vote on this horrific piece of legislation.
Representative Holtorf.
Madam Speaker, I'm going to keep my remarks brief.
I've been told that before.
I'm glad we have a sense of humor this fine evening,
That's right.
and I do appreciate your leadership, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
And your sense of humor. The one thing that is frustrating for me and for the constituents of House District 63, and we do have a lot of FFLs out there, but one of the premises that you need to understand in rural Colorado is, and I'll use some street lingo so you can better appreciate this for my city slicker friends, and that's a term of endearment, so please don't misunderstand me. Usually dealing and trading in arms is a side hustle. It's a side hustle for what we do in the country. So there isn't 3, 4, 5, 6, or 8 employees. There's not a large administrative staff. It's usually one guy peddling guns, and he's got an FFL. Now, this expands greatly the state control and scope of regulation and management in this state. Something that was done at the federal level now is going to be transported down to the state level, and the state's going to have more control and authority over all these firearms licensed dealers. I don't understand why you think you need it, other than it's just about control. Control in business, more control, more authority, top down. And also to raise money, because we know many people in this chamber and in this building like to raise fees so they can get more money out of people's pockets. And I noticed in the fiscal note that, yeah, you're going to be able to raise millions of dollars, charging in whatever that fee is across the number of thousands of FFLs that now have to file this state permit. And I get to some of my colleagues' insatiable appetite to get more money in the general fund. It's not mine. I think less is better. Of course, I think less laws are better. Less fees are better. Less regulation is better. I know that not everybody thinks like me. But I'll tell you, the people in my district, that's what they want. That's what they asked me to promote. That's what they asked me to speak to. I don't know what comes after this. I think this is a building process, and so do the people I represent. This is not the end. This is a means to an end that will come in future time. So as you build this, as you now have every state firearms dealer permit, and you know everybody that's handling these, what comes next? What will be next? That's the thing that concerns people. As we all come back to session next year, we'll all be scratching our heads and we'll be all eager to get more bills, and some of us will run 5 bills and turn them in, then some of us will get 25 or 30 bills because we're in the right place at the right time and we're talking to the right people. And we're peddling our influence and trying to change the world for the better. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is just going to make a lot of people that want to reject this, they're going to make them leave. And maybe that's part of it too. We want to restrict the amount of firearms, restrict the amount of dealers. I reject the legislation. I reject the intent of the legislation. I don't think this is going to make the state safer. I don't think this is going to help control crime in any way. It's just going to have more state government. It's going to grow government. You're going to have more employees in government. You're going to have more people that need to work to administer these programs. And actually, dealers are going to leave. Maybe that's what you want. I don't know. Maybe you want the money. Maybe you want to grow government. Maybe you want all the above. I know the people in House District 363 don't want any of that. So I'll be a strong no.
Assistant Minority Leader Winter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I spoke quite a bit about this bill in seconds. I just want to bring up the main talking points that I spoke about, which I think directly affect House District 47. Like I said yesterday on seconds is I have one of the most premier gunsmithing schools in the nation in House District 47. They've been known for being a great gunsmithing school for as long as I could remember in our community. And I believe that this piece of legislation will directly affect that educational institution. People travel from all around the country to go to school at this institution to learn the trade of gunsmithing. And the slate of bills that have been passed over the last couple of years and this year will directly affect their ability to be able to do that. I think that it will detract individuals from coming into my community, which will hurt the school. We talk about higher ed all the time. I think it will be a big hit to this institution. I think that with that being said, it'll hurt the school financially. It will detract people that want to be gunsmiths from coming into my community because they don't know where they sit within the law, what skills they will be able to learn. Will they be able to learn the skill of AR builds and building platform, or will that be something that the school will have to take out based upon the legislation that we pass? This legislation right here, a lot of these individuals that become gunsmiths end up open and operating their own gun shops, which ties right back to the bill. And I think it'll push them out of that business as well. Secondly, it'll affect the economy. In a lot of towns in my district, one thing about House District 47 is there's a good sporting goods store around every corner. It's no secret that the constituents of House District 47 love the Second Amendment. I won't say all of them because I don't speak for everybody. I'm sure that there's a handful that don't, but for those that do, it will affect them. It will affect their businesses. Last but not least, that'll affect their local economies. Speaking just for my local community, we'll see it with the school, them bringing themselves and their families in. Most of them are retired military and police that end up going into this trade, and they bring their families in, and they add to the tax base in my community. There's a lot of pieces of legislation that have hurt the economies in House District 47 in my community. I fight fiercely for my district. This is another piece of legislation on top of many others that are killing industries in my community. Enough's enough. I urge you to vote on this. I urge you to vote no on this for that reason. Protecting this education institution, protecting the economy within House District 47. These things matter to us. These things matter to my constituents. And with that, I will be voting no. And for those reasons, I urge you to vote no as well. Thank you.
Representative Luck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's just another permit. They already have a federal firearms license. What's another application? Well, the bill sponsors argued that this was necessary because the federal government is unable to actually inspect and ensure that the Colorado FFLs are doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they're responsible for doing. And we heard that roughly...
Excuse me, Representative Luck. Members, we are on thirds. We do need to keep voices down. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We heard that roughly 8 Colorado businesses with FFLs have had their license revoked. I'm not sure what time frame that was, what time period. 12 years, over 12. Oh, in a year, over a 12-month period. Okay, so roughly 8 of the licenses have been revoked. So presumably, if in a 12-month period, 8 licenses have been revoked, the federal government is in fact inspecting, and there are people operating in this space. And so I'm not sure why we need an additional layer of so-called protection. That comes to about $3 million, $3.4 million in the 25-26 fiscal year. 25, 27, 28 full-time employees to administer this program for roughly 1,500 FFLs. You know, there are a number of FFLs in my district that are a single person who got it because they themselves are a firearms collector and they want to get a better deal. That's all they are. But we need this much money, this much FTE going towards this, even though the federal government is already doing this work. We only designated 2.8 full-time employees to inspect mortuaries and funeral homes, despite the fact that we know that there is an increase, quite a large problem across the state with that issue, and there isn't the state there inspecting. The unclassified felony that was brought up by one of my colleagues is also worth really talking about. And I know it's late, and I know that there are conversations about what happens if we go past a particular hour and, you know, do we all turn back into pumpkins, etc. So let me just summarize by saying it is unconscionable in my mind that someone who fails to fill out a permit, and I'm thinking of some of the FFLs in my district that are single guys. You know, I know this one, he's probably 85 years old and he's had an FFL for who knows how long because he collects firearms and he wants the better rates. He wants to be able to get it shipped directly to his home. And if he fails to file this permit, he ends up with an unclassified felony with a punishment of $250,000, which is probably the bulk of his assets, I dare say, and a felony that precludes him from having an FFL and from having the very collection that he's built up over the course of his lifetime because he failed to file a permit when he already has a permit with the federal government, has already gone through the onerous process of obtaining that. If the goal is to eliminate firearms from Colorado, this bill is the next great step towards that. Because it will. It will eliminate the supply, the legal supply, not the illegal supply. That will come in. And as I mentioned during previous remarks, there'll be ways of either creating or stealing from the military bases that we have here or smuggling them in. But if you're talking about legal firearms transactions, this bill, in compilation with all these other bills, will, in essence, eliminate that market. And the next bill will be impacted by that because there won't be any revenue generated from it, and all the funds that are seeking to be filled by it won't actually have any dollars in them. But in eliminating that industry, we're not going to find ourselves safer. You might feel safer for a little bit until you realize that more and more folks are left unprotected because they can't actually access these particular tools. We have spoken ad nauseum about all sorts of data of principle, of policy that demonstrates that this is not the road to go down if you genuinely want safer communities. I don't think I've ever said this, but bad bill, vote no.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion before us is the adoption of House Bill 1353 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Shebel, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Ortiz, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Ortiz votes yes. Representative Lindsay, how do you vote? Representative Lindsay will come back. Representative Weinberg, how do you vote?
No.
Representative Weinberg votes no. Representative Wilford, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Wilford votes yes. Representative Judah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Judah
Yes.
votes yes. Representative Epps, how do you vote? Representative Lindsay, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Lindsay votes yes. Representative Epps, how do you vote? Representative Epps is excused. Please close the machine. With 40 aye, 21 no, and 4 excused, House Bill 1353 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Representatives Ortiz, Lindsay, Judah, co-sponsor. Representative Wilford, co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Shebel, please read the title to House Bill 1349.
House Bill 1349 by Representative Duran concerning a new excise tax related to firearms and in connection therewith, contingent on voter approval of the new tax and the retention by the state of all revenue generated by the new tax of the 2024 general election, levying an excise tax on the gross taxable sales of firearms dealers, firearms manufacturers, and ammunition vendors from the retail sale in this state of any firearm, firearm precursor part, or ammunition, and requiring the excise tax revenue to be spent for crime victim support services, gun violence prevention, safe and lawful gun use, and enhancement of school safety.
Madam Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move House Bill 1349 on third reading and final passage.
Assistant Minority Leader Winter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sorry, colleagues, it's getting late, and I need a couple notes. I think we're all ready for Starbucks. So I do my best to not only listen, but hear all members that talk in this chamber and what they actually have to say. And as I hear these arguments, I try to find a place to intersect in hopes of trying to understand each other. Even though our perspectives might be different, maybe through common ground we can find some mutual understanding. And if you'll just give me a little bit, ma'am, to kind of explain this, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, ma'am. The words I heard from one of my impassioned colleagues earlier on a speech that she gave were trust and feeling safe. And in my opinion, those two words are one of the reasons that we have the Second Amendment. I've talked about it numerous times here. The Founding Fathers fought for freedom. And the reason that they put the Second Amendment in those founding documents is because they wanted to keep the trust and they wanted to feel safe. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Something that I need to read now. I apologize. One of the quotes that Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist number 28, if the representatives of the people betray their constituents, there is then no resource left but the exertion of that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government, and which against the usurpations of the national rulers may be exerted with infinitely better prospect of success than against those of the rulers of the individual state. In a single state, if the persons entrusted with supreme power become usurpers, the different parcels, subdivisions, or districts of which it consists, having no distinctive government in each, can take no regular measures for defense. The citizens must rush tumultuously to arms without concept, or without concert, without system, without resource, except in their courage and despair. I think sometimes as Americans, we're lulled to sleep because of the comfortable freedom that we enjoy. I personally am not naive enough to think that history can't repeat itself. And I can't unequivocally just trust government. I think that's part of the founding of this country, and I think we've talked about trust, and we've talked about being safe. And this is where I try to intersect those 2 points. I'm not throwing digs, it's just the trust and feeling safe. I heard what you were saying. And I use this argument in hopes that as I can hear what you're saying, maybe we can find that point where you can kind of understand, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but where we're coming from. And as we see the legislation pile on, we've talked about how this is just one more tax or one more ability to keep somebody that may not be able to own a gun or a firearm. This might stop them from being able to do that based upon economic status. There's many things. I'm not going to be much longer. I just want to finish this. Gun owners know that the sacred right of the Second Amendment helps them keep a healthy trust with government. That's what the founders intended. I think we can all agree on that. I mean, there is document after document, quote after quote of why the founding fathers believed these things. So that's the trust part. And that's the trust part that I think my district and a lot of my colleagues and a lot of gun owners have, is we really do look back at what the founders say and why they said those things. And I think the safety part is the ability to protect life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which I think we all want to be safe, and we all want to keep that safe. So from that perspective, I appreciate the words you had to say, and I wanted to just spin those back in a way that maybe we could have that conversation where we could connect and hit that nexus, and I hope that that kind of explains what myself and my colleagues have been fighting so hard for, because we believe those words, and it's about trust and feeling safe for us as well. So for those reasons, I'd ask you all, please help us preserve the Second Amendment, that maybe we can make sure to keep and maintain that trust between us as citizens with our government, and to be able to keep our families safe and continue the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And for those reasons, with many other reasons that I will have to vote no on this legislation. Thank you.
Representative Bradley.
Thank you. I agree. It's been a long night, long day. Wanted to say I appreciate your vulnerability again, and you inspired me to be a little bit vulnerable as well. My stepmom, when she was married to her first husband, she was 19, was beaten in front of her 1-year-old son, had to be hospitalized with broken ribs and a broken jaw, had to have law enforcement outside of her room until she was discharged. It's really hard for a 19-year-old that's married to have a man beat you to almost an inch of your life. She became a gun owner because she never wanted to be a victim again. So I asked to see a different side of the story. I'm trying to understand why we would take away the greatest equalizer for women. And so I hope that you hear me. Why wouldn't we give them every opportunity to have a gun and access them without financial restrictions? Some of you are scared of guns, and I get that because I used to be scared of guns too. They were intimidating, they were scary until I started firearm training and shooting and holding different guns and making sure that I was safe. And now I have to say that it is the greatest feeling for me as a mom to know that I can defend my children against any outside force, that I have an equalizer for me against men and other people wishing to do harm to my children, because I never want to be a victim, and I certainly don't want to be a victim in front of my children. But I have the ability, thankfully, to pay an excise tax. But I worry about my friend who has 3 boys that lives alone, who is just scraping to make ends meet, running a business out of her home to be able to do that. And I don't think that that's what's fair. I don't think that we get to sit here again and talk about legislation that's equitable, and we're passing this bill that's not. There are going to be people that cannot afford to pay this tax. And if we're being honest, inflation's at an all-time high. Property taxes are at an all-time high. People are living paycheck to paycheck. We've all heard it. We've all gone door knocking. Seniors can't afford to stay in their homes without stripping something like medicine or groceries. And in Douglas County, I think people think that we just have got it made, but we have double income families because both parents have to work, which means more time away from our kids, because we're trying to pay these bills. And now instead of helping this public, what I would say we're in a public safety crisis in the state, we're imposing more taxes. And when we do that, it would be different if we lived in a state that had low crime. But I'm telling you, the last 4 years, it's through the roof. And I've sat here and I've quoted it, and you guys have heard me. We are the 4th least safe state in the country. So why are we going to make it less affordable for people to protect themselves? Not to mention, this is a tax on law-abiding citizens, a tax on our Second Amendment rights, a tax on people who want to defend and protect themselves. And if we pass the legislation that went through here last week, there's going to be such a ban on guns, there's not going to be an excise tax on anything anyway. Because those guns will be banned and the ammo to boot. This bill will disproportionately affect people who cannot afford this extra tax, who will not be able to defend themselves, and unfortunately, crime and assault will continue to rise. And it does not fall on deaf ears that criminals are the people who create victims. They will be left out of the tax created to help the very people they make victims. I don't get it. We're doing nothing to stop them, but we're restricting people who just want to protect their families. The people that make us victims get a get out of jail free card. They're not paying this tax. They're not paying the victims fund. If we're really focused on victims, let's quit making more of them in our state. How about that? How about we create legislation that penalizes the criminals and leave the law-abiding citizens alone? Maybe you should talk about legislation to create felonies for crimes, because what we're doing in here for the last 4 years is not working. If it was, all of these stricter legislation on guns would be doing something for crime. And I have 4 years of data that is telling you it's not. And I know some of you talk about the Constitution, that it's outdated and whatever your excuses may be. But for my constituents, and I would say most of your constituents that don't know anything that we're doing down here, that don't keep up, think that you are upholding the Constitution. And I will tell you, I don't know the inside and outside of the Constitution and every single amendment, but I do understand the Second Amendment. And that one does not come with stipulation. It does not say you can defend yourself only if you can afford the taxes associated with owning a gun. It does not say that. It's dangerous legislation to extrapolate what the Second Amendment says. And ultimately, you're responsible for your own vote. But when we sit down here and we legislate on law-abiding citizens and we let criminals off the hook, crime will continue. Please vote no on this bill.
Representative Bradfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill refers to a ballot measure for the November 2024 election, and conditional upon voter approval, this bill imposes an excise tax on firearms dealers, firearm manufacturers, and ammunition vendors beginning April 1 of 2025. Now, I've told you that in case you haven't read the bill. But firearms and ammunition are also currently subject to 11% federal excise tax. This is just another tax on top of the tax. Around 9% for the state. What does that add up to, folks? The idea might be that to just add so much tax on that guns become unaffordable, but I don't think it works that way. I urge a no vote on this bill before it goes beyond the ballot in November.
Representative Frizzell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is indeed getting late. Members, I would like to say, first of all, how glad I am that this measure is going to be on the ballot in November, as opposed to us just cramming yet another bad gun bill through without actually asking the citizens what they think. But I suspect it wasn't out of the desire for citizen feedback at the ballot. It was more because it was required by law. But anyways, that said, I am really concerned that once again, we are going to the voters with the ballot measure that overpromises on revenue expectations. We've seen this a bunch over the last few years, and we not being me, the poor JBC members have got to scramble to try to make up revenue that literally is not coming in according to expectation. This bill, increasing the costs of purchasing a firearm and ammunition, combined with other measures that have passed through this chamber in this session, I believe very strongly is simply going to reduce the number of guns sold legally in the state of Colorado. If we are reducing the number of guns that are and the types of guns that are available to be for sale, then it follows that the number of guns purchased would reduce commensurately. You know, I understand that victims, we've talked a lot about victims assistance programs in relation to this bill, and I'm very, very supportive. I said on second readings that, this is important, but again, this is not the way to ensure stable funding for victims assistance programs. This is not it. That comes from the intestinal fortitude of this chamber when we are reviewing the long bill, which we had the opportunity to do, and we chose not to. I am a solid no vote on this bill, and I ask that you be as well. Thank you.
Representative DeGraff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaker, sorry.
That's okay.
Wow, we just you cannot get enough infringing. Infringe, 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 infringe. I'm not really sure how that part is not clear. I'm not really sure why that part is not clear. I did say infringe, 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 infringe. And that's what we are doing. You are doing. I'm trying to stop you. I would like to stop you. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. So their just power is derived from the consent of the governed, and this is the founding, this is the foundation of our Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, which was fought for in blood. And it was fought. It was the words that inspired a nascent backwater to stand up to the greatest empire in the world and win. Maybe about 3% of the population of 13 loosely affiliated states. Because what is unique, what is truly revolutionary about our founding documents is that they posited the individual citizen as sovereign over government. And the reason that the founders said very clearly that this auxiliary right of self-defense and against tyranny, an obligation to defend against tyranny, was to defend that sovereignty, because it is rare and it is fleeting. And it should not be taken lightly, and I fear that this is just another example of taking that too lightly and figuring that we can just pile more straws on the camel's back and nothing will happen. And history shows us otherwise. History shows what happens when populations are disarmed and the power rests with a few individuals. So I get it that this is going to the vote. This is going to the vote of the people. And one thing I noticed just as going through this again is that I didn't really realize that we went from 19 pages to 35 pages. We basically doubled this bill. We doubled it. Could not get enough of infringement, so we doubled it. The devil is in the details, and there's a lot of details. There's a lot of details. There are lots of details. There's lots of devil in this bill. And I like, but securing does not mean offering up to the citizens of Colorado the opportunity to infringe. That's not us securing the rights of the citizens of Colorado just to say, oh, we're going to put it up for a ballot initiative. If you want a ballot initiative, if the individuals want it, then they can pay the tax individually. But you don't infringe on a right, and you shouldn't ask neighbors to infringe. And I like how it's like, oh, this is going to go to a fireman's charitable fund. Wouldn't we feel good about that? And other problems that are here in the United States, mass shooting events, domestic violence perpetrated by those with a history of domestic violence. Yeah, that's true. But that doesn't have anything to do with the millions of firearms that are out there, probably in Colorado alone, that have never been involved in domestic violence. And if we want to look at a solution to domestic violence, we'd probably be better off looking at alcohol and marijuana and other drugs and fentanyl and all these other things that we flooded the state. But anytime that we decide that we're going to be concerned about life, you're going to be concerned about life, the solution is guns. The solution is always guns. It's not getting fentanyl off the street. It's not putting those that commit domestic violence and putting them in jail where they can't infringe on somebody else's rights. The solution is always taking the rights of law-abiding citizens and figuring out other schemes to put them in jail. So this is ultimately a registration. Every vendor shall keep a complete and accurate records necessary for the determination of correct tax liability, including itemized invoices of all retail sales of any firearms, firearm precursor parts, or ammunition of the states. In the state, I'm sorry. A copy of all records required to be kept pursuant to this section, any other records deemed necessary by the any other records deemed necessary by the executive director at the authority of the executive director. That is those other records. So we don't know what they are, but they are going to have, the government will have a detailed list of everything. And I've gone over several times the millions, the hundreds of millions of deaths at the hands of government. And all of those individuals never saw that coming. When they turned it over, when they turned their firearms over to the government who promised to take care of them. But history, again, if we ever learn from history, what we'd learn from history, besides that we never learn from history, is that for the greater good never is. And it's erased at the cost of repeating it. So it's not something I like to say, but why learn from history when you can just live it? And I'm afraid that all of these things, they certainly don't move us away from revisiting and reliving history. It's not a guarantee we're going to do that. Maybe we can go into it with a little bit more circumspection, but it doesn't move us away. And as we know, any unarmed people are slaves, are subject to slavery at any given moment. And I think we ought to stay away from that. We should learn from history. So I ask you to vote no. I know everybody just gets giddy about the idea about having no guns and suddenly everything will be kumbaya, rainbows and roses.
Representative DeGraff, you do have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, ma'am. But history shows otherwise. Can't vote for this. I hope you won't vote for this.
Representative Luck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As this bill touches on 3 issues that my constituents, my most vocal constituents, are very passionate about, I would be remiss not to say something. And so I will just simply say, share with you the sentiment of many of those vocal constituents in saying taxation is theft.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion before us is the adoption of House Bill 1349 on third reading, final passage. Mr. Schiebel, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Ortiz, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Ortiz votes yes. Representative Lindsay, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Lindsay votes yes. Representative Weinberg, how do you vote?
No.
Representative Weinberg votes no. Representative Wilford, how do you vote? Representative Wilford signals a yes vote with a thumbs up. Representative Judah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Judah votes yes. Representative Epps, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Epps votes yes. Please close the machine. With 44 aye, 18 no, and 3 excused, House Bill 1349 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Representatives Ortiz, Lindsay, Epps, Judah, and Wilford, co-sponsor. Please close the machine. Mr. Shebel, please read the title to House Bill 1296.
House Bill 1296 by Representatives Kipp and Soper, also Senator Marchman, concerning modifications to lessen the burdens of responding to records requests for custodians of records under the Colorado Open Records Act.
Madam Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move House Bill 1296 on third reading and final passage.
The motion before us is the adoption of House Bill 1296 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Shebel, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Ortiz, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Ortiz votes yes. Representative Lindsay, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Lindsay votes yes. Representative Judah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Judah votes yes. Representative Weinberg, how do you vote?
No.
Representative Weinberg votes no. Representative Epps, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Epps votes yes. Representative Wilford, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Wilford votes yes. Please close the machine. With 38 aye, 24 no, and 3 excused, House Bill 1296 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Madam Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move to lay over the balance of the calendar to Monday, April 22nd, 2024 at 9 a.m.
Seeing no objection, the balance of the calendar will be laid over until Monday, April 22nd, 2024 at 9 a.m. Members, any announcements, Majority Leader?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to thank our Chief Clerk Robin and our Chief Assignable Clerk Kathy for our lunch today, and all our staff, nonpartisan staff, for all their hard work in staying with us tonight.
And Madam Majority Leader, I do have some business to take care of. First, members, you're free to leave. Mr. Shebel, signing of bills, resolutions, and memorials.
The Speaker has signed Senate Bill
Signing of bills,
25.
resolutions, and memorials will be buried in the journal. Madam Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move the House stand in adjournment until Monday, April 22nd at 9 a.m.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in Adjournment until Monday, April 22nd, 2024 at 9 a.m.